Freiburg, Germany, 2010. The room is silent, too silent for a police raid. Only the ticking of a clock, the slow hum of fluorescent light, and the faint scrape of brushes drying on a wooden table. A team of investigators moves in, gloved hands trembling, not from fear, but disbelief. The walls are lined with canvases, Kandinsky, Leger, Kempendonck, each piece more masterful than the last. Millions of euros worth of history hanging in this quiet studio on the outskirts of Cologne. In the corner, a man with silver hair and paint under his nails watches the chaos unfold. He doesn't resist. He doesn't even look surprised. He lights a cigarette, exhales, and mutters in German, "They were never fakes. They were just unseen masterpieces." The officers don't respond. They know who he is, Wolfgang Beltracchi, the man who fooled the art world for decades. One agent lifts a painting off the wall, eyes wide. Beneath the layer of oil and varnish lies something hidden, paint pigments that shouldn't exist in 1914. Synthetic titanium white, a chemical fingerprint of fraud. And just like that, the illusion collapses. Museums, collectors, galleries, all duped by a man who painted not just images, but dreams of authenticity. But how did one couple, working from a modest workshop, rewrite the history of modern art and make millions doing it? And how did no one notice until it was too late? To understand the world's greatest art forgery scandal, we must step back into the story of a man who didn't just fake paintings, but truth itself. Before the scandal, before the headlines, there was a boy with a brush. Wolfgang Beltracchi was born in 1951 in Höxter, West Germany. His father, an art restorer and church painter, taught him early how to mix pigments, how to mimic texture, how to breathe life into imitation. In that small workshop, surrounded by the scent of turpentine and linseed oil, the young Wolfgang learned something that would define him for life: that every masterpiece begins with a lie. He didn't see forgery as crime. He saw it as skill, a kind of reincarnation of genius. When he copied, he felt close to the greats. He became them. By his teenage years, Beltracchi could reproduce a Picasso so convincingly that his own art teachers refused to believe he'd done it himself. He wasn't content with imitation, he wanted invention. Not just to copy a Kempendonck, but to create a Kempendonck that never existed, yet felt as if it could have. That subtle difference between replication and resurrection became his signature philosophy. In the 1970s and 80s, the art market was transforming. The world's appetite for modernism exploded, and with it, the hunger for lost works. Collectors wanted stories, pieces with mystery, provenance, and myth. And that's where Beltracchi found his stage. But every great artist needs a partner. Enter Helene Beltracchi, his wife, muse, and accomplice. Elegant, intelligent, and utterly fearless. Together, they didn't just forge paintings, they forged entire histories. Helene played the part of the heiress, claiming she'd inherited a secret collection from her grandfather, a supposed patron of early expressionists. Wolfgang painted the works to fill that imaginary collection, and together they built the illusion of the Flechtheim collection, supposedly once owned by Werner Jägers, Helene's invented grandfather, and connected to the real art dealer Alfred Flechtheim. It was a false provenance, but a believable one. Every detail was perfect. The canvases were aged with dust and tea. The frames were antique. The back labels were forged in exquisite detail, down to handwriting and gallery stamps. Even the nails looked old. But the genius lay in psychology. Beltracchi didn't copy known paintings. He painted what should have existed, works that fit seamlessly into the artist's evolution, filling gaps in their catalogs. When experts examined them, they didn't question their existence. They were thrilled to discover them. And in those moments, Beltracchi says, The world wanted to believe more than it wanted the truth. Museums displayed them. Collectors paid millions. Critics praised their beauty. And somewhere in Germany, Wolfgang smiled quietly, knowing he'd fooled them all, not with deception, but with desire. What began as an artistic experiment soon became an empire. Over 3 decades, the Beltracchis sold forged works attributed to masters like Max Ernst, Fernand Léger, Heinrich Kempendonck, and André Derain. Each painting was a time bomb, one pigment analysis away from exposure. But year after year, they escaped untouched. Until one day, a single speck of white paint, titanium white, cracked the illusion. The lie had run too long. And now, the art world was about to face its greatest embarrassment. It began with a photograph, a faded black and white image, deliberately aged, showing a young Helene Beltracchi's grandmother standing beside a wall lined with paintings. The caption, Collection Fleckheim, 1927. Every art expert who saw it believed it was real. It wasn't. Wolfgang had painted the background himself, Helene had posed in vintage clothes, and the entire photograph had been chemically treated to mimic the yellowing of time. That single image became the seed of their greatest illusion, the Fleckheim collection, a phantom archive of lost masterpieces supposedly owned by a Jewish collector, forced to flee Nazi Germany. And that story, tragic, believable, unprovable, was irresistible. Helene, poised and eloquent, played the role of the heiress perfectly. She didn't oversell. She never begged for trust. She let them believe. Wolfgang once said, "People see what they want to see. I simply gave them what they were looking for." They began small, a Kempendonck here, a Derain there. Each one sold quietly through intermediaries, avoiding direct contact with museums. Dealers, seduced by the promise of discovery, asked few questions. The art world, after all, thrives on secrets, and money moves fastest when it whispers. Then came the breakthrough sale, Rotes Bild mit Pferden, Red Picture with Horses, attributed to Heinrich Kempendonck. In 2006, the piece sold through Lempert's auction house for nearly 2.9 million euros to a private collector. The sale validated everything. The Fleckheim collection was now officially real. From that moment, the forgeries multiplied. The Beltracchis painted from dawn till dusk, inventing forgotten works of expressionist giants. They used period-accurate pigments, bought antique canvases, and even mixed dust from century-old frames into the paint. But their greatest weapon wasn't chemistry, it was psychology. They understood how the art market's ecosystem functioned. Galleries, dealers, collectors, and experts all feeding on each other's reputations. Everyone wanted to be the first to rediscover genius. Everyone wanted to believe they'd stumbled upon history. So when Beltracchi's paintings appeared, they were greeted not with skepticism, but celebration. Critics wrote glowing reviews. Museums displayed them. Even Werner Spies, the world-renowned Max Ernst expert and former director of the Centre Pompidou, authenticated one of Beltracchi's forgeries. It was a hall of mirrors, the experts validating each other's illusions, unaware that they were admiring the same ghost. Behind closed doors, Wolfgang and Helene lived quietly but luxuriously. Their home was filled with art, laughter, and contradictions. On one wall hung genuine works by Picasso and Dali. On another, their own counterfeits, indistinguishable to the naked eye. As Beltracchi later said in interviews, he never saw himself as a copyist, but as an artist completing the works others might have painted. He wasn't lying, not entirely. His work was original in form and style. The crime was the name signed at the bottom. By the mid-2000s, the Beltracchis had fooled nearly everyone. Their paintings sat in some of the most prestigious private collections in Europe and America. Even Christie's and Sotheby's were unknowingly part of the web. Every sale funded another layer of deception. Legal companies, shell accounts, staged provenance trails. Their empire of illusion grew wider, richer, and more sophisticated. And yet, inside the house, cracks began to form. Helene grew anxious. The bigger the illusion, the higher the fall. Wolfgang, ever the dreamer, seemed untouchable, convinced that his brilliance made him invisible. But in 2008, a subtle shift began. A new generation of forensic art analysts started using pigment spectroscopy, tools capable of detecting trace elements invisible to the human eye. Beltracchi's art, for all its perfection, contained one fatal flaw: modern white pigment. A single particle of titanium dioxide, invented in the 20th century, would soon undo decades of deceit. It started with a single painting, Rotes Bild mit Pferden. A chemist found traces of titanium white, a pigment unavailable in 1914, the year the work was supposedly painted. The result spread like wildfire. Experts re-examined the Fleckheim collection, one painting after another. Signatures didn't match. Provenance documents conflicted. The illusion began to dissolve, and panic set in across the European art scene. Museums faced humiliation. Collectors demanded refunds. Dealers pleaded ignorance. But at the center of it all stood Wolfgang and Helene, calm, defiant, and still painting. Because even as their empire began to crumble, Beltracchi didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as an artist misunderstood by the system he'd exposed, a system built on vanity, wealth, and blind faith. And when the police finally came for them in 2010, he didn't resist. He poured himself a glass of wine, looked at his unfinished canvas, and whispered to Helene, "They can take everything, but not the brush." Cologne, 2011. The courtroom feels like a theater. Rows of reporters, photographers, and museum curators fill the seats, their pens trembling with the weight of disbelief. At the center of it all sits Wolfgang Beltracchi, calm, clean-shaven, wearing a perfectly pressed suit, as if he were attending the premiere of his own film. Beside him, Helene, poised and unflinching. They are not just on trial for forgery. They are on trial for embarrassing the establishment. The indictment spans decades. Forged paintings attributed to Max Ernst, Heinrich Kompendonk, Kees van Dongen, and Fernand Léger, sold through some of Europe's most respected dealers. The estimated damage, tens of millions of euros. But the real loss isn't financial, it's psychological. The art world's credibility lies shattered on the floor. The prosecution paints Wolfgang as a manipulative con artist, a man who built an empire of deceit. The defense paints him as a misunderstood genius, someone who exposed the hypocrisy of a world that values names more than art. When Beltracchi speaks, the room quiets. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't even apologize. "I painted things of beauty," he says softly. "The only crime was signing the wrong name." He looks directly at the judge. The experts authenticated them. The collectors fought to own them. The galleries made millions. Who exactly was fooled? Them or themselves? A murmur ripples through the courtroom. He's not wrong. Outside, journalists swarm, dubbing him the most successful art forger in history. But inside, the evidence is damning. The pigment analysis, the false documents, the fabricated photograph, the money trail. Each piece fits perfectly into a puzzle of deception. Then comes the twist, the confession. Wolfgang admits to forging around 300 paintings over nearly 40 years, but only 14 can be definitively proven. The rest, their whereabouts unknown, their authenticity forever uncertain, hang in private collections, silently mocking their owners. Helene, who handled much of the sale logistics, confesses too. She admits to posing as the granddaughter of the fictitious collector and fabricating provenance documents. But when the prosecutor asks if she ever felt remorse, she simply says, "We never harmed anyone. We gave them what they wanted, beauty." It's a strange, almost philosophical defense, one that unsettles the room. Because deep down, everyone knows there's truth in it. The art world had built its identity on myth, on the idea that authenticity comes from authority. The Beltracchis had simply mirrored that illusion back at them. When the verdict finally arrives, it feels almost symbolic. Wolfgang Beltracchi, 6 years in prison. Helene Beltracchi, 4 years. Not for creating fakes, but for fraud. As they're led away, Wolfgang smiles faintly, like an artist satisfied with his final brushstroke. "History," he says to a guard, "will decide whether I was a forger or a creator." And history, it seems, still hasn't decided. But the story doesn't end in that courtroom. While Wolfgang serves his sentence, the art world begins its reckoning. Museums quietly remove paintings from display. Auction houses hire teams of forensic scientists. Collectors sue dealers. Dealers sue experts. Experts sue each other. The Beltracchi effect becomes a ghost haunting the art market. Every unverified painting is now a question mark. Every provenance story, a potential lie. And yet, paradoxically, Beltracchi's own works, the forgeries, begin to rise in value. Collectors, ever hungry for narrative, now covet his fakes as artifacts of scandal. Even from prison, Wolfgang remains relevant. In interviews, he speaks with disarming charm, mocking the world that condemned him. In one interview, he called forgery a kind of creation without permission, not theft, but continuation. And he's right, at least in part. Because what his story exposed wasn't just corruption or greed. It revealed a truth about human nature, our desperate need to believe, to attach value to the signature rather than the soul. In 2015, Wolfgang and Helene were released early for good behavior. Within months, they began painting again, this time under their own names. Collectors lined up to buy his new works, not because they were genuine, but because they were Beltracchi. The irony was complete. The forger had become authentic. In one interview, Wolfgang stood before a camera, smiling faintly. "They say I fooled the world," he said. "But maybe the world wanted to be fooled." He turned to the canvas behind him, a vast, colorful explosion of brushstrokes, signed boldly with his own name. "Now," he said, "I can finally paint as myself." There's a quiet irony in the aftermath. The man once branded the greatest art forger of the 20th century now sells paintings under his real name, and collectors still fight to own them. Only this time, the deception is gone. The mystique remains. Wolfgang Beltracchi now lives and works near Lucerne, Switzerland. His studio is sunlit and sprawling, filled with the same smell of oil paint, varnish, and turpentine that once scented his crimes. He works daily, as if nothing ever happened. Helene, forever his muse, still frames and curates his art. He paints freely now, surreal, vibrant, unbound by imitation. But his works still carry a certain echo, a ghost of what came before. Every brushstroke feels like a question. What makes something real? Because if an image can move you, inspire you, or make you believe, does the name at the bottom truly matter? That question haunts the art world still. After the trial, institutions scrambled to rebuild trust. Museums installed stricter authentication protocols. Auction houses introduced pigment dating, and provenance tracing became an industry in itself. But beneath the technical reforms, something more fragile cracked: faith. Faith in expertise, faith in authority, faith in the invisible bond between artist and audience. Beltracchi didn't just forge paintings, he forged certainty. He revealed that even billion-dollar institutions could be seduced by narrative, by the romantic myth of lost art rediscovered. And perhaps that's the true brilliance of his con. He didn't expose art's weakness. He exposed ours. We crave stories more than truth. We pay more for emotion than evidence. And when faced with beauty, we stop asking questions. Art historians still debate his legacy. Some call him a criminal, others an accidental philosopher. Beltracchi forced us to look at our own illusions, said one German critic. He didn't steal art. He revealed that the art world was built on theft already. The theft of authenticity, the commodification of creativity. For collectors, it's a scar that never faded. Many quietly destroyed their fake paintings to avoid embarrassment. Others kept them, hidden in vaults, unacknowledged, yet too beautiful to burn. And somewhere, between the truth and the lie, Wolfgang's name lives on. He wasn't just a man who fooled experts. He was a mirror held up to an industry that pretends to worship art, but truly worships value. In interviews today, he laughs easily. His charm remains intact, sharp, effortless, dangerous. People say I destroyed trust, he told Der Spiegel. But maybe I just showed them how fragile their trust really was. He doesn't deny the damage, the fraud, the greed, but neither does he apologize for it. In his mind, he was never a counterfeiter. He was a storyteller. And every story, no matter how beautiful, has a little lie inside it. Helene agrees. We were actors in a play the art world wrote, she said once. We just performed it better than they expected. And perhaps that's what makes their tale unforgettable. Because the fake art empire that fooled museums isn't just a story about crime. It's a story about belief. About how a man with a paintbrush exposed an empire built on illusion. About how authenticity, like art itself, is a matter of faith. And about how one couple reminded the world that even beauty can lie. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more real stories from the digital world. Don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss what's next.